In preparing for the sermon this week, it was a challenge for me to think about the difference between proud moments and significant moments. Just like for you all, just to take a moment to think about your proud moments in your life. The first one that comes to my mind is many years ago, graduating from high school. Graduating from high school to me seemed like I was going to school forever and ever. When you're young and you don't have much experience, you think that those 12 years are the longest of your life. But some 30 years afterwards, you find that it was just a very short time. But proud moments are something that we always think about. You know, the proud moments of your first child being born, or your second, third, or fourth child being born. Your attendance at universities. Your successful paying off your car or your house. All those are proud moments, but today I want us to focus more on the significant moments in our lives. Jürgen Moltmann is a well-known German theologian. In 1986, he was asked to address the American Army chaplains at their monthly training conference. Now, we need to understand that Moltmann is a well-known theologian throughout the world, and he has many offers and can go speak for a lot of money at universities and other places. But he chose to accept this particular invitation. He went to speak to chaplains. And when he spoke, this is what he explained. During World War II, Moltmann was a soldier. He was a regular, everyday, average soldier in the German army. Toward the end of the war, he was captured and he was placed in a POW camp, imprisoned, and knowing that his nation was losing the war, Moltmann found himself in great despair. It was probably the lowest point of his entire life. Then one day there was this American chaplain that came walking by and handing out English language New Testaments to these German POWs. We might think of it as a foolish gesture for this young chaplain to be handing out English language New Testaments to these German-speaking POWs. It makes us think, what was this chaplain thinking? However, Moltmann was one that received one of these New Testaments, and he knew just enough English to make sense of what he was reading. You see, he had been raised in a Christian home, and he had not put much effort into learning the Bible and following what it meant. But this day, in his despair, as he read about Jesus' crucifixion, that New Testament came to life right there in his hands. In the midst of his personal Golgotha, Moltmann began to understand for the first time the first Golgotha, Jesus' Golgotha. Moltmann understood that he needed to change. And right there, in that terrible time, in that terrible place, Moltmann gave his life to Christ. Once the war was over, he entered seminary and he became the theologian that we know today, and his works are read around the world. As he finished telling the story, he reached into his pocket and he pulled out this small New Testament that he had received some 40 years earlier. And as he showed it to those chaplains, they were aware that this was one of his greatest treasures. From the treasure from the past that God had used to breathe into him the breath of life. When I heard the story the first time, I wondered about this chaplain that had handed out those New Testaments. Why had he given them, why was he handing out English language New Testaments to these German-speaking prisoners? Maybe he just wanted to do something and he didn't know what else to do. Maybe he had a box of these New Testaments and he didn't know what to do with them, so he started handing them out. I wonder if this chaplain ever had any idea that his small, seemingly hopeless act would have great returns. I wonder if he had ever imagined that his small gesture would make such a big difference. I believe that he never knew how God had used him at this particular time. I believe that he never knew how God had used this unhappy time and place in such a powerful way. I believe that he never knew how his small gesture affected Boltzmann's life. I pray that when this young chaplain gets to heaven, that God has one of those jumbotrons like the Dallas Cowboys have. It's like 60 yards long and 80 feet high. And then he shows that scene back at that POW camp where that chaplain hands off that New Testament to Moltmann. But then I want it to be like Paul Harvey, the rest of the story. I want him to watch and see what happens to Moltmann after that seemingly insignificant moment. I want him to see the changes that take place. And that's when we come to our lesson today. Jesus tells his disciples not to be like the Pharisees and the scribes. Now, if we go back and reread the scripture, we'll find that he told them to listen to the Pharisees and the scribes. Much like when your parent says, do what I say, not what I do. That's what our instructions are to do. We are to listen and learn from the Pharisees and the scribes, but we are not to act like they did, because they coveted the proud moments in their lives instead of these significant moments. They cared more about their personal glory than they did for God's glory. They lived to be served instead of serving. They loved it when people called them rabbi. They loved being greeted with great respect. They loved receiving honor. Jesus told his disciples, and through them tells us, don't be like them. Instead of collecting proud moments where we are being honored, God calls us to collect significant moments when we are allowing God to work through our lives to help others. Rather than seeking personal glory, Christ calls us to live in such a way that people will see God's good works through our lives